brothers and sisters, kin and queen, has shared. Sometimes you have to go back in the past to save the future. Universal Tree, the Back to the Future project.
Shango is near him in the red with the double-headed axe. Yeah, the double-headed axe is Shango.
That one there, yeah.
Yes. He rides the lightning. He's a fire god.
Oh, okay.
And he's the god of justice.
Okay. So they got similar gods to the Greeks?
Well, the Greeks probably took from this system.
Yeah.
Like the Greeks probably have similar gods to West Africans. That's probably the order of events.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the other way around.
Yeah, the other way around.
Yeah.
But we learn about the Greek gods in school, don't we?
Yeah.
We have to study them in public schools.
Yeah.
But we don't have to study African gods. Yeah. So I want to call your attention to these figures here. These are called Preto Velhos, the old blacks. And as far as I know, this is exclusively Brazilian. I'm not aware of this kind of a spiritual entity in any other place. But the old blacks represent two things. One of them is that the conditions under slavery were so extremely brutal in Brazil that life expectancies were either 4 or 7 years, depending on where you ended up in Brazil and what kind of work you were made to do.
4 to 7 years.
By the 19th century, with coffee plantations, life expectancy there was about 15 years. But that's as good as it got.
Oh, wow.
Was slaving on a coffee plantation. Yeah. So there were some individual black Africans who lived to be very, very old and died of old age. And so the others felt that they were spiritually elevated entities for having been able to die of old age under those circumstances.
Oh, wow.
So this is the idea of the Pretos Velhos, the old blacks. And so they become venerated. They become uplifted as an ancestral group.
That's crazy, man. Because they lived.
And then the other idea associated with the Preto Velho is the souls that were lost in the crossing. So the other day you learned from Cosme that 1.8 million Africans perished in the Mafa, in the crossing itself, died in the ocean. And so there's that idea of this ancestral entity that exists in between the old world and the new world.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And that they function as a special kind of guardian angel for the descendants of the enslaved in the diaspora. So it's a special type of a guardian. And so they function as our African memory.
Okay.
So, for example, in your family, do you know your continental origins in Africa or not?
I know that some of them come from Ghana.
Ghana, okay.
Yeah,
so you got Ghana, then to Jamaica, and then now to UK.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And even Cuba.
But you still have an African memory. How is that possible? How do you remember? How do you know that you've been lied to? How do you know to go looking for the truth? Your Preto Velhos watching over you, whispering in your ear, protecting you.
That's what we say with the ancestors.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have ancestors that are direct from your bloodline, but then you have this other kind of spiritual entity in Brazil. I've never heard of this anywhere else, that Brazilians have a very, very specific and close relationship with their Preto Velho.
Okay.
Not with the group, you have one.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting.
So, traditional African practices have two main components. One of them we just talked about was the veneration of the ancestors. And the second one then is the service to the Orishas. So when you're dedicated to an Orisha, it's usually one or two. And then you have a mission associated with those powers and characteristics. And so when you create your practice, you need a lot of specific kinds of objects in order to do that. And that's the function of one of these kinds of shops. So your Orisha is going to be associated with a specific color, for example. You're going to perhaps need to cook foods for offerings. So they each have specific foods that they like. And even down to the pepper. You know, you have to know which pepper your Orisha is going to want with their food. This here, the dende oil, this is a very important part of traditional African religious practices, but also a very strong symbol of resistance and survival.
Was it called dende oil?
Yes, this is palm kernel oil.
Okay.
So what happens under the slavery system is that the people who are designated as the masters in the contract, they're not incentivized to feed, clothe, shelter, or take care of the people who are designated as the slaves in that contract. And so it's this idea of just work them to death, go buy another one.
Wow.
And so when those Africans wanted to pursue their own economic activities or organize themselves socially, the people designated as the masters usually didn't stop that from happening because that was money they didn't have to spend. So West Africans who came, this is mostly in the Northeast in Bahia, Salvador, where you're going tomorrow, you can learn more about this, is that they began to create the dende oil with the same technology that they had brought with them from West Africa.
So the oil basically is like what you use when you're making a when you're praying or whatever, you're making a contribution to the gods. Mm-hmm.
But it's also used in cooking as well because those foods are also the foods of the gods. So in the acarajé is fried in dende oil. The moqueca is stewed in dende oil, so it's important in the food as well.
But would you eat it, or was it just that's what you could do to offering for the gods?
No, you eat it too. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so this dende oil production that's recreated then in the state of Bahia in Salvador, this becomes a very strong symbol of survival and resistance. And some of those productions they're still continuing today. They're the direct descendants of the enslaved who started producing this in Brazil.
Okay,
that's
amazing.
There's a lot of concern in the world about palm kernel oil destroying rainforests. It should be boycotted. You hear a lot about this in the news. Here in Brazil, we have our own palm kernel oil that is made in kind of a quilombo sort of circumstances of communities who are traditional. They brought the technology from West Africa and they continue to produce this.
And quilombo means black, isn't it?
Quilombo is like maroon community.
Maroon, yes. Maroon, yeah. And the peppers are also, you say, is important?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love peppers.
So these kinds of necklaces are things that people would wear when they begin their journey with their dedication. So it's usually worn under the clothes.
Okay.
This is because of the time periods where these practices were strongly repressed or even illegal, that people began to hide them. And so now it's just a tradition that you kind of hide. You wear your beads under your clothes. You don't display a lot of this type of practice out in the open.
And why do you wear the beads? To symbolize what you believe in?
Each one of these colors or color schemes coordinates with a specific Orisha.
A specific god?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so then you would have a Mãe Santo or a Pai de Santo, a Holy Mother or Holy Father, who runs what's called a terreiro. That's the place where the worship happens. So that's the consecrated space. That's the chapel or the temple. Traditionally, they are outdoors. They're on land, but in the city, you can find them indoors out of necessity. And so then you begin your devotion. And you begin to learn how it is that you are to serve your Orisha. There are many different, you could think of them as denominations. So when you say traditional African practices, that is as broad a category as saying Christians.
Okay, there's a lot of them.
Yeah. So you got your Catholics, then you got your Protestants, and then the Catholics, you got your Roman Catholics, you got your Eastern Catholics, and then with the Protestants, you got your Lutherans, you got your whatever, Episcopalians, you got your It's the same thing. There's not one. It's not monolithic.
Okay.
It's not monolithic. So each one of these tejeros has its own bloodline, so to speak.
Okay.
Of how the practices are transmitted from one generation to the next.
There's different roots.
Right. And the same thing's true in Africa today. Because of ancestral veneration, we can be of the same tribe, we can be of the same nation, we could be next door neighbors, but the specificities of how I practice and how you practice can be different.
Yeah, it's like cooking food.
Right, because you're, exactly, so like cooking food. Yeah. So it's difficult to talk about because people want an explanation of this thing. What is candomblé? It isn't one thing.
Yeah, it's a mixture of different things.
Yes, it's a mixture of different things, and it's different in different times and different places. And some of the tejeros here, they can trace back to the African who crossed and where that person was from.
Oh, wow, yes. They could do that through the traditions, isn't it?
Right,
Because,
some of them can. So what happens is, we can think of a sense that bloodlines are broken by the Mafa. Okay? Because you're taking people out of their communities and you're forcibly mixing them together.
So what's the Mafa?
The Atlantic crossing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
the Atlantic moment. And so when we do that, you're breaking ancestral lines, you're breaking bloodlines, right?
Yeah.
So what happens in Brazil is they recreate those traditions through the spiritual and religious practices. So they create what I call spiritual bloodlines.
Okay, yeah.
So you don't have to be an orphan. You don't have to be without your family. You come into a group like this and you then learn these rituals and rites and then you pass them along. And so it's a way of maintaining, instead of bloodlines, they become spiritual bloodlines.
Okay, okay. So it's a way of belonging.
Yes.
Being part of something.
Right. And many of them will pray and sing and chant in their original African language. Yeah. So there are black Brazilians today who speak Kikongo. Yeah. There are black Afro-Brazilians who speak Yoruba. These languages have been preserved as well
I
through
find
these
that,
traditions.
From what I've done in my research, I find that there's a lot more people what do actually here than they do in Africa now, because Christianity is taken over.
Right. This is why Ogun chose Brazil as the place that old Africa would survive.
Okay.
Because the ancients knew they couldn't prevent the destruction of the motherland.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is something that I'm gonna.
So this is basically, in another word speaking, it's like New Africa.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.